for the ages. You know, these type of decks are quite skill intensive, and when you get into a mirror match, there are a lot of decisions, some of which can be very punishing.
Yeah, we already saw kind of a similar matchup in the first round of the tournament today, where William Huey Jensen was playing Is It Flash going up against Gabriel Nassif. So, you know, I imagine this matchup is also going to play out quite similarly, right? And the matchups actually play out kind of strangely, where oftentimes it's correct to just tap out and play spells on your turn to play around your opponent's counter magic. So there's going to be this dance where players are, you know, trying to get some permanents into play, you know, whenever they can, basically.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive as well. So the practice of these players, you know, the level of players that we have here, 2 MPLers going at it, will really have paid off for them, depending especially on when they locked in this decision to play the Simic Flash deck, because that's when you start to get around to things like, well, what does the mirror look like?
Yeah.
And it looks like Paradise Druid is the order of the day here, even though Temple of Mystery would have been nice to get onto the battlefield there. For Seth Manfield, he's got to get Paradise Druid, get something rolling.
And Brad just deciding whether or not he wants to main phase the growth spiral to ensure that it resolves, or keep 2 mana and pass and kind of represent, you know, the potential of having cards like Quench.
That's right. It is very powerful to represent these type of cards, but as you can see here from Brad's play, it's also very powerful to make sure that your spells resolve, and that's what he's going to do here. Main phase growth spiral, puts a breeding pool into play, sends the turn back, and look at this, a forest off the top of the library for Seth. He would have loved to see an island there.
He really wanted a blue source here, because having access to 2 blue means you can represent Sinister Sabotage, and of course, if he had an untapped blue source, he also could have been representing a Frilled Mystic.
Now he's still going to keep that blue mana intact here. He's got Ether Gust and Brazen Borrower at the ready. And of course, this is the hard part about playing against the deck, is now Brad's got a pair of Nightpack Ambushers. But if you're sitting in Seth's seat, you have no idea what he could have in his hand, and it could very easily be Frilled Mystic or Nightpack Ambusher, and he played differently against those cards.
And I don't know if Brad can afford to run out an Ambusher, because your opponent going Frilled Mystic, untap, play it, Nissa, or Hydrate Crisis, the risk is just too high. So there is a very good chance that Brad just goes End of Turn Growth Spiral, hopes to just continue hitting his land drops, so he can set himself up to cast Nightpack Ambusher and still have access to that Ether Gust in hand.
And now the players are both kind of in this back and forth cycle where nobody's doing anything. Seth says, you know what? Your move. And there is that growth spiral, as you predicted, Paul. So Brad Nelson looking to try to hit a land here, by the way, because otherwise he doesn't get to make his land drop for that turn. Oof. Frilled Mystic. Not bad, though. And a Quench. Okay, well, now he's just got 6 cards in hand, all spells.
I wonder if Seth is just going to run out a Brazen Borrower here to kind of just put some pressure. He does have the Ether Gust here if Brad Nelson does have something like a Frilled Mystic here. So the only card that would be pretty annoying is if Brad had something like a Mystical Dispute. But now Seth is the one that has the pressure here, right? He's got the Brazen Borrower. He's got the Paradise Druid. Brad is forced to respond here.
That's right. So Brazen Borrower is going to start getting into the red zone. And with the extra mana available here for Seth Manfield, he now has the Frilled Mystic Nightpack Ambusher combo as well. He can protect this board state, of which he's ahead in right now.
Absolutely.
And now Brad says, I can't sit here any longer. I have to start doing something. So he's going to fire off one of these Nightpack Ambushers, even understanding that there's a decent chance it gets countered.
Yeah, and now Seth is going to be able to cast Frilled Mystic, counter the Ambusher, and have Ether Gust up. So Brad can't punish him with, for example, land Nissa if he had it.
There's the second copy, or excuse me, the first copy of Brazen Borrower into hand here for Nelson. This is not going the way that he wants. He's behind on board, behind on mana, and it's starting to really not look good for him quickly.
Yeah, and you know, Brian alluded to this previewing the matchup, how mana is so important, so key in this matchup. The person who is able to play a spell and have additional mana to have counterspell backup is the one who's going to be ahead. And here, Seth is the one sitting at 6 mana. He was the one who was able to, you know, run out of threat and always have that Ether Gust up available at all times.
Quench off the top of the library, perhaps giving Nelson, giving Manfield even more insurance on the victory here, because Nelson just doesn't have the luxury of doing nothing yet. That's what he's done so far for the turn. And you know who does have the luxury of doing nothing? Seth. He's just like, go.
Yeah, Brad is just kind of in one of those situations because there's pressure. He just has to run out threats and just hope one of them sticks.
He's going to go for an end-step Brazen Borrower as basically a feeler, but if it does resolve, it gives him a way to answer the opposing Brazen Borrower, so it's not that bad.
Yeah, and Seth probably going for the Quench here, and might even be considering just running out the Night Pack Ambusher here, because try to think about, you know, the combinations of cards that Brad could have that could really punish you. I think the combination in my mind that would be most punishing would be something like Nissa, untap, Breeding Pool, Ether Gust, your Ambusher. And it looks like he actually doesn't care about the borrower. It still just wants to keep up the counterspell here.
Yeah, he can keep up Ether Gust to keep, like you mentioned, the disaster scenarios away. But the truth is, even those scenarios are things that he can overcome at this point. Things looking really good for Seth Manfield here in Game 1. Yeah, he's just leveraged this mana advantage. He hit an additional land drop, and he had a Paradise Druid, and he's been able to take advantage. Their draws have been very similar otherwise. Brad hits land number 5, but just has to pass the turn back. 4, 7, 8, 9 he's taken if he blocks the Brazen Borrower. And everything else were to come into the red zone here.
Yeah, and Brazen Borrower can only block flyers, so Seth's ground creatures are safe to attack here.
Seth contemplating whether it's okay to attack with Paradise Druid. The Ambusher plus the Mystic are a 2-turn clock just on their own. And here is an Ether Gust to send Night Pack Ambusher away.
And this will resolve. Seth doesn't really have a counter here for the Ether Gust. The Quench, of course, Seth has the ability to pay for.
So the question is, does he want it back on the top of his library? You would think
so.
Yes,
Yeah.
And he's going to be happy he attacked with the Paradise Druid here as well, because knocking Brad down to 6 means that the pressure is very much on. Any creature that he gets beyond that would force lethal, although as it stands, he doesn't quite have that for next turn.
Yeah, now Seth contemplating whether or not he wants to put an additional threat on the battlefield here, maybe considering a Hydroid Crisis for 2 while keeping up a Quench or an Ether Gust.
That would give him a lethal attack, assuming that he can maintain this board state. It is tempting. And he could do it for 3, but
yep,
it's not.
3 would be the worst of the numbers.
Yes. There we go, down to 2. He draws the Night Pack Ambusher. He can't cast it, but it critically has given him 2 more points of power on the battlefield, and that's what he needs to force lethal through. Borrower can block Borrower, and he needs to come up with 6 other damage. Now he has 7 versus 5, so he's put himself in the winning position and kind of forced Brad Nelson to do something like this, which isn't going to work out for him.
Yeah, so Brad's going to gain 1 life here, go to 7. Brazen Borrower can block the flyer, that's a lethal attack.
So very well played, of course, by both of the players, but particularly Seth Manfield. Once he got ahead, he didn't fall for that trap of, oh, it's fine, I'll just kill this, do that, I got you anyway. You know, he really was careful down those last few turns, even though he was way ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing Brad could maybe have considered doing that, I mean, of course, he was just so far behind, but was maybe just cast a Quench on the Hydroid Crisis, just because you don't even want a 2/2 flyer on the battlefield. And if Seth does pay for it, maybe that gives you the window to resolve something. But despite all of that, Seth was so far ahead, I don't think it would have ended up mattering.
So we're going to consult our sideboards with Seth Manfield up a game. If you're just tuning in, first things first, welcome. We're really happy to have you along. Second thing you need to know about this match is that this is for top 8. These players are both 4-1 here on day 2, so fantastic day for both of these players. And a 5th win means that you're through to Sunday and a top 8 finish here at Mythic Championship 7. It's a big deal. You know, a career accomplishment, right? It's another huge cash as well. And the implications for the players already in the MPL are huge as well, with trying to maintain their slot in the MPL or maybe even make a run for the World Championship seat if they're in that kind of position.
Yeah, specifically with Seth Manfield, right? You know, he already thought that by making it into day 2, he had a really good shot at Worlds. And now he's, you know, even if he makes the top 16, potentially could cement himself there.
It's funny because when the players are concentrating as hard as you need to concentrate to play a game like Magic, sometimes it can look like they're a little disconnected from it, you know. But we saw some tears from Seth yesterday after he made day 2, you know, but when you watched him play, he looked just like that. You know, he's not showing the emotion he feels, but it is absolutely there.
Yeah, I mean, once you don't have to play any more matches of Magic, you can just kind of let loose. And Seth is not one to kind of hide his emotions.
Right.
Much better hand here for Brad Nelson. He's got the Growth Spiral, he's got the Ambusher, and he's got the Sinister Sabotage. So this is the ideal start, but you know what? Seth has a very similar draw here as well.
Yeah, Brad also has as many lands now as he did the whole entire game, so that part could help him too.
He's got one more now.
Yeah, here's Growth Spiral. And once again, he's going to just main phase it to get lands onto the battlefield. Hydroid Crisis off the top here for Seth isn't really what he wanted to see. Is he going to do a main phase Growth Spiral himself? That's my question.
Well, there's an interesting wrinkle here now because after sideboard, both players have access to 4 Mystical Disputes.
Right.
So maybe you can play it on your opponent's turn.
And unfortunately for Seth, he has hit a forest, so he couldn't represent it anyway. But as it stands, once again, these decks are turned on their nose. Everybody's acting in their main phase, even though they could be casting it on their opponent's turn.
Yeah, now Seth has an interesting decision. He can run out his own Nightpack Ambusher here, or he can just run out the bounce effect on the Brazen Borrower, Petty Theft, bounce Nightpack Ambusher, play the Breeding Pool untapped, and kind of bluff a counterspell. As it would be unlikely for Brad to go main phase Nightpack Ambusher again if Seth went with that play.
It looks like they both just want to have ambushers on the battlefield as soon as possible, and it's going to become a question of who can deal with the other one. And right now, it's actually Brad who has the upper hand there, especially with 2 copies of Aethergust. The question is, does he do it now and get the ambusher out of the way, start slamming for 4, or does he wait for his opponent's turn where he can get the additional wolf out of the deal but risk it getting countered?
The sequencing here is perfect, too. What you do is you wait for the end of turn, you haven't played a spell, make the wolf, then cast the Aethergust, so you kind of play around all the angles.
So Brad says, why not both?
Exactly.
I'll have my wolf and eat it too, thank you very much. So he does exactly that. He gets the wolf for free, and now Aethergust sends away the opposing Nightpack Ambusher, and it actually looks like Seth put it on bottom, huh?
Yeah, he just wants to find lands.
Rough spot here for Manfield. He got a slight advantage in the first game and was able to expand that advantage over the course of the game. But that doesn't seem to be the case here, and this has got to be tempting now for Nelson to go for Sinister Sabotage. As we know, Mystical Dispute was drawn, though, by Seth Manfield, so he does have the answer for it.
So yeah, if Brad goes for the Sabotage, Seth will be able to Mystical Dispute, but then Seth will be tapped out. And extremely likely for Brad to tap out once again on his turn and just slam that Nightpack Ambusher again.
Yeah, and it looks like he's came to a similar conclusion, even though Brad is fully aware that the Sinister Sabotage has a low likelihood of resolving, as Seth would be unlikely to risk something like this right otherwise. He does fire off the Mystical Dispute, so the Ambusher goes back to hand. The Wolf on battlefield shrinks back down to 2/2, but I don't think it'll stay that size for long.
It'd be really nice if Brad finds a land here, as if he found a land, he would have been able to play the Ambusher and still have access to Aethergust, but he will not have that. And this land was huge for Seth, because now he's going to be able to play Nissa here.
This is going to be the Nissa and kind of hold your breath turn. Let's see. Oh, interesting, though. This second copy of Nightpack Ambusher here for Brad Nelson does change things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it actually pumps up the wolves that are already on the battlefield. You can almost use it as a combat trick.
Right. So Seth will block one of the wolves to keep the Nissa alive, likely the 3/3 in the hopes that there's a trade. And, of course, if Brad runs out that Ambusher, that will be a blowout.
There's really no fear from Brad's side of the table here, as Castle Vantress, yeah, it can tap for blue, but Nightpack Ambusher...
Not a blue spell.
Right,
so
that
can't Mystical
requires
Dispute.
the full amount. Exactly. So if Brad wants to take that line, it is available to him. The question is, what other things does he need to consider? Because that would require him effectively tapping out here, as he's only got 5 mana.
Yeah. I mean, the top priority for Brad is to basically not allow Seth to untap with Nissa Who Shakes the World. Because the most dangerous thing that Seth can play if Nissa's in play is Hydroid Crisis, right? You have access to, I mean, he's got a Breeding Pool and 3 Forests in play. So we're talking about 8 mana. With the untap with the Nissa, that's 10 mana. He's going to be able to play an 8/8 Hydroid Crisis, draw 4 cards, gain 4 life, and come right back into this game. So he's going to do what he can to get this Nissa off the battlefield. And part of that is, you know, getting that land, the Castle Vantress, off the battlefield. So there's even a chance here that Brad goes for potentially maybe a draw step Aethergust on the Nissa, just to prevent that from happening. Or potentially even just a main phase Aethergust. Maybe you just hope that Seth doesn't have land number 5 right after this happens.
Jeez, I would be so tempted to do that here. Let's see what he does. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what he's going to do.
That's what he's going to do. I just would be so tempted to pull this. This is not a play that you see very often.
But this is, yeah, but this is so scary, right?
Look at Seth. Did you see the look on his face? He almost rolled his eyes at the, like, are you serious?
Yeah, and he can't put it on top. He needs to hit lands.
Yes. Oh, he's unhappy with that. Yeah, and that even got to Seth Manfield. Normally, he's pretty tough to rattle, but he's like, wow. This did not work out the way that I had hoped it would.
And if you notice, Brad Nelson did not run out that Paradise Druid, and that was because he needed his Aether Gust to resolve and didn't want it to get Mystical Disputed. On top of that, of course, you just get a 3/3 anyways by not playing something.
That's right. Wow, sick plays here from Brad Nelson, forcing the issue on Seth Manfield and pressing his advantage. Now this one's starting to feel out of reach if you're in Seth's seed.
Yeah. Seth doesn't even have access to double blue here anymore, so can't even. Brad doesn't have to be afraid of Furled Mystic or Sinister Sabotage.
That's right. It's 2 green mana that he's facing down. He can simply run out another Night Pack Ambusher, keep the pressure on, and get to do what you really want to do with the deck, which is untap with Night Pack Ambusher.
Yep. And it looks like he's going to run it out while Seth doesn't have access to blue mana, probably just playing a Paradise Druid here as well.
Aether Gust a little too late here for Manfield. And there just doesn't seem to be much that he can do at this point. Ooh, Mystical Dispute.
That's a big
draw.
draw.
That is just dirty. And will that be game 4-7? No, not quite.
It's basically
Not-
game
not
7, 8,
literally.
9. If he
It's
does play
9
the
damage,
if he
yeah.
plays the Ambusher, that would be 11.
Yeah, which isn't enough, but it is enough.
Right,
So game number
exactly.
2 goes to Brad Nelson with some sweet plays there in the middle part of the game. He even had Seth Manfield shaking his head.
Draw sucks, doesn't it?
What?
Being on the draw sucks, doesn't it?
Oh man, Seth's reaction was great. He's like, yes.
Yeah.
He just shook his head like, uh-huh.
But I'm sure he's thinking to him, guess what, buddy? You're on the draw next game.
Yeah. It really is a big deal. I mean, we saw Seth Manfield in game 1 on the draw, or excuse me, on the play, and he ran out that Paradise Druid and was able to take advantage of that mana advantage for the rest of the game.
Yep. I mean, both ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think mana is just the absolute most important factor in this matchup.
Yeah, it is really difficult in the matchup if both players are kind of doing what they want to do to break serve, you know, to get to the point where you can be the one who's ahead and protecting a lead rather than your opponent.
And that's why you see Chemister's Insight in the sideboard of these decks as well, because that allows you to just have a play at the end of your opponent's turn. If your opponent counters it, it's not a big deal, right? Because you can just cast it again, and it just ensures that you continue hitting your land drops for this matchup.
That's right. Okay, this is game 3 between Seth Manfield and Brad Nelson, and this is for top 8.
Brad's mulliganing.
It's going to be tough for Brad. He's mulliganed and he's on the draw, and as he just pointed out, that is a distinct disadvantage. I assume Seth just wants all the lands he can get at this point.
Yep. Yeah, Seth has a bit of a slower hand, but he does have the 2 copies of Mystical Dispute to prevent any early game shenanigans here from Brad Nelson.
We'll have to see how aggressive he is with the Mystical Disputes as well. I'm definitely curious to see that.
I think you want to play the island here, right? Just in case. I don't think it's going to matter too much. But yeah, if Brad, for example, just goes for the Growth Spiral, he might just fire off one of these Mystical Disputes just to slow him down.
It's definitely possible.
Given that he has a second copy, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes for that.
Brad's just going to pass the turn back, perhaps hoping that Seth has his own copy of Growth Spiral that he could respond to, but no. Seth says, sure, I'll just draw my card. Temple of Mystery, pretty nice here, actually.
Yeah.
He's looking at it just in case he needed an untapped land to be able to hardcast Mystical Dispute for its full price, but he says, no, I don't need that.
Yeah. Not a whole lot of green spells he's too concerned about. If Brad goes for the Growth Spiral here, I think you do need to Mystical Dispute, because if Brad goes Growth Spiral, land played Night Pack Ambusher, you're in a lot of trouble,
You're in
as you
big
do
trouble.
not have the mana to counter it.
But now we're into the true next level plays here, Paul, because Brad just did nothing.
Didn't even play the Growth
Nope,
Spiral.
he's like,
wow.
don't even need it. This is very much a staring contest between 2 elite pros. Who blinks first, or more importantly, who's forced to blink first is going to be the real issue here. And the clock is weird. It's actually land drops at this point. If somebody's going to miss a land drop, that's when you're going to start seeing them fall behind. And with that in mind, growth spiral here for Nelson.
And Seth deciding whether or not he wants to run out this dispute here. I mean, this hand does look pretty nice here for Seth, as he has the ability at some point to run out the Night Pack Ambusher and have 2 mystical disputes to protect it.
I mean, it's, yeah, I won't even say it. He does actually have a window here for it, but it's just so absurdly risky if Brad gets to stick Nissa as a result, right? You just can't.
Yeah, Nissa.
If he goes land, untap, land, Nissa, you're like, oh, maybe not.
Right, especially if Brad gets a breeding pool into play, because then you can go Nissa.
Oh, but he is going for it. Night Pack Ambusher here.
Okay.
And there's a land on the battlefield here for Nelson, and he actually does get to do that.
Yeah.
Man.
Oh,
and
this
he even
is
has the Brazen Borrower. Now he gets to untap, go land Nissa. What a devastating turn of events here. I did not think that Seth was going to go for it. He did, and it has not turned out well for him at all. Oh, my goodness sakes. Well, the good news if you're sitting in Seth's seat is that he could do the same thing right back to him.
Right, but Brad is the one who has the initiative, and he is the one who's going to be able to untap with Nissa in play.
You know, we talked about breaking serve. That's what that looks like. That was it right there. Now Brad Nelson, like you said, he has the initiative. He's the one who's ahead, and he can start to protect that lead.
And Brad, with all that additional mana available to him with that Nissa, now can also, you know, afford to play around cards like Mystical Dispute and Quench.
I'm curious to see if Brad blocks here just to take his opponent off of Mystical Dispute, because it is an island that got animated, and it does look like he's going to do so. Of course, the forest, specifically the forest for Brad, is more valuable to him than a land would be, than an island would be at this point to Seth, because it makes 2 mana. But still, taking him off of blue says he has carte blanche. He can do whatever he wants here.
Brad can actually kill Nissa here. He can float the mana, animate a land, play the second copy of Nissa, animate an additional land, and still have counterspell up.
Wow.
So this is going to be a really big turn for him.
He can just slam the door on this game and, well, open a door to the top 8 for himself?
Well, what's going to happen is he's going to have 2 3/3s in play, a Nissa and a counterspell, and Seth is going to have nothing.
I like his position.
That's a pretty good one, I think.
I would do that. And Brad, look at Seth. He just knows this one has completely fallen apart. The disaster scenario is upon him. He's now losing his Nissa, who shakes the world. He's down to just 4 lands, no other permanents on the battlefield, and Sinister Sabotage, Ether Gust, and Mystical Dispute for Nelson.
3 counterspells, just leaning on those.
A frustrated Seth Manfield runs out a Night Pack Ambusher. But that's not going to resolve here, is it?
Brad can do any number of things here. He has access to 4 mana.
So he can Gust and protect it with Mystical Dispute?
Right, if Seth has his own Mystical Dispute.
Right, which in this case he does. And he will certainly fire that off here. He's had 2 of them in his hand the whole game. This is the first great opportunity that he's had.
This will very close to prompting the concession here would be my guess.
He might just scoop. Look at him, look at this screen. He's just like, you have that too, really? And now he knows this one's over. Brad Nelson takes advantage. I mean, Seth Manfield opened the door just a little bit. He's like, okay, I'm gonna take this opportunity to resolve one of my most powerful spells, Night Pack Ambusher, and I'm gonna take on a little bit of risk, maybe a lot of risk to do so. And Brad just stomped through that open door.
Yeah, I mean, Brad had the exact combination of cards that would maximally punish Seth Manfield, right? That's Growth Spiral into land, into Bounce Your Ambusher, into untap land Nissa.
Unbelievable.
Right? Because I'm sure Seth was thinking, look, if he counters this, or if he bounces it, maybe he doesn't have a Nissa, right? If he doesn't have the bounce spell, I'm still going to have the